She walked through the grand hall, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her smile perfectly poised, her laughter light and effortless. To the world, she was an independent, successful woman, admired for her grace and intelligence. She had built a life that others envied, carefully crafting an image of perfection. But beneath the surface, behind the carefully applied makeup and the elegant dresses, there was a truth she carried in silence. A truth that would shatter everything if revealed. Her marriage was a secret. A sacred, undeniable truth that no one could ever know. Not her family, not her friends, not even the closest person in her life. It wasn't just a matter of privacy or discretion. It was a secret so deeply buried that even speaking of it felt like a betrayal. She had spent years hiding it, rehearsing her responses, learning to deflect questions, ensuring that no trace of her hidden life ever slipped through the cracks of her carefully curated existence. Every morning, she woke up alone in her apartment, the absence of his presence both a comfort and an ache. The wedding band, delicate and thin, was safely hidden inside a velvet box tucked away in the depths of her dresser. She could never wear it in public, could never allow even a glimmer of its presence to be seen. She told herself that this was how it had to be, that this was the price she had to pay. But some nights, when the loneliness wrapped around her like a suffocating fog, she wondered if she had made the right choice. It wasn't as if she regretted loving him. No, she had never once doubted her feelings. Loving him had been the most natural thing in the world, like breathing, like the warmth of the sun on her skin. Their love had been real, undeniable, a force that neither of them could resist. But circumstances had demanded secrecy. They had made a promise, a painful, necessary promise, that they would keep their marriage hidden no matter what it cost them. She thought back to the moment when she had said, "I do" in a small, dimly lit room with no witnesses except the officiant. There had been no grand wedding, no celebrations, no toasts in their honor. Just the two of them, clutching each other's hands as they sealed their love in silence. In that moment it had felt like enough. They had believed that love alone would be strong enough to bear the weight of secrecy. But love, no matter how deep, could not erase the burden of pretending. It could not erase the ache of stolen glances, of whispered phone calls, of the constant fear that someone someday would find out. Every conversation was a tightrope, every moment in public a careful performance. She was exhausted, but she could never let it show. So she smiled, she laughed, she played her role flawlessly. Because her secret was one she could never afford to reveal. "You said, 2. The mysterious husband. Who is he?" 800 words. ChatGPT said. The first time she saw him, it was as if the world had paused for a single heartbeat. He wasn't the kind of man who easily blended into the background. There was something about him, something impossible to ignore. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, the quiet confidence in his posture, the sharp intelligence in his eyes. Or maybe it was the way he looked at her, as if he already knew something about her that she had yet to discover herself. His name was Adrian Cole. To most, he was just another man, handsome, yes, but not someone the world would recognize. He wasn't a celebrity, not a billionaire, not someone with a name that carried power. But there was an air of mystery about him, a quiet magnetism that pulled people in without them even realizing it. He was composed, deliberate in his words, never saying more than necessary. She met him on a cold autumn evening at a bookstore tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. It had been a chance meeting, or so she thought at the time. She had reached for a book and so had he. Their hands had brushed, and for a brief moment their eyes had locked. He had smiled, not the kind of polite, meaningless smile exchanged between strangers, but a smile that carried weight, as if he had already decided something before she had even spoken. They talked, and what was supposed to be a fleeting encounter stretched into hours. He had a way of making her forget time, of making the world around them blur. He spoke with certainty but never arrogance. He listened, not just to respond but to truly hear her. It was unnerving yet exhilarating. She had never met anyone quite like him before. Their relationship moved fast, but it never felt rushed. He was steady, grounded, the kind of man who could walk into a storm and never flinch. He didn't shower her with extravagant gestures, didn't drown her in meaningless words. Instead, he gave her something far more valuable: his presence, his unwavering loyalty, his silent understanding. But Adrian had secrets. She had known that from the beginning. There were things he didn't talk about, parts of his life that remained hidden behind carefully placed walls. He never lied to her, but he never gave her the full truth either. There were moments when she caught glimpses of something darker beneath his calm exterior, a shadow in his eyes, a tension in his jaw, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. She never pushed him. She told herself that everyone had things they weren't ready to share. But as their love deepened, so did the questions she didn't dare ask. Where did he go when he disappeared for days at a time? Why did he always seem to know things before they happened? Why did he insist, with such desperation, that their marriage had to remain a secret? The night he proposed, there had been an urgency in his voice, a pleading in his eyes. He had taken her hands in his grip firm but trembling. "I love you," he had said, his voice raw with something she couldn't quite place. "But if you say yes to me, you have to promise, no one can ever know. Not now. Maybe not ever." She should have questioned it more. She should have demanded answers. But she had been too in love, too lost in the depth of his gaze, too caught up in the way he made her feel like the safest place in the world was in his arms. So she said yes. They married in a small hidden chapel with no witnesses except the officiant who asked no questions. There was no wedding dress, no grand celebration. Just them standing side by side, bound by love and secrets. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the reality of their situation settled in. Adrian became even more careful, more guarded. He never stayed in one place for too long. Some nights, he would hold her so tightly as if afraid she would slip away. Other nights, he would be gone before she woke up, leaving behind only a note and the faint scent of his cologne on her pillow. She wanted to believe that he was protecting her. That whatever secrets he carried, whatever darkness lurked in the corners of his life, it was all to keep her safe. But deep down, she knew that love built on secrets was a fragile thing, constantly teetering on the edge of collapse. And yet, despite the doubt, despite the fear, she never once regretted loving him. Because even if their marriage had to remain a secret, even if the world could never know, Adrian Cole was the one thing in her life that felt real. And that, she told herself, was enough. She had learned to live two lives. One that the world saw and one that only existed in the quiet corners of her heart. In public she was Olivia Carter. Independent, successful, unattached. She moved through life with purpose, attending social events, excelling in her career, and maintaining friendships that kept questions at bay. No one ever suspected that when she went home at night, she was a wife living in the absence of her husband. Her days were filled with work, endless meetings, and the constant hum of conversations that never touched the truth of her existence. She had built a reputation as a woman who had it all together, someone too focused on her ambitions to be tied down. People admired her for it, envied her even. "You're so lucky," her friends would say. "You don't have to worry about messy relationships or broken hearts." She would smile, nod, sip her wine and let them believe the lie. But the reality was much different. The reality was waking up alone in a bed that once held the warmth of the man she loved. It was making coffee in the morning and setting out 2 cups by habit, only to remind herself that he wasn't there to drink the second one. It was keeping her wedding ring locked away in a box, only slipping it onto her finger when she was home where no one could see. She had become an expert at deception, not because she wanted to lie but because she had no choice. It was in the way she laughed off questions about her love life, the way she dodged invitations that might force her to explain why she never dated. She had even mastered the art of hiding her emotions when people spoke about marriage, weddings, or love. But the hardest part wasn't the lies. It was the waiting. Adrian had never promised her a normal life. From the moment they married, she had known that he would come and go, that he couldn't always be there. But knowing and accepting were two different things. She told herself that she was strong enough, that she could endure the distance, the uncertainty, the secrecy. But there were nights when the loneliness was unbearable. Nights when she sat on the couch, phone in hand, waiting for a call or a message that might never come. Nights when she ached to hear his voice, to feel his arms around her, to know that he was safe. Sometimes she would catch herself staring at couples on the street, holding hands, laughing, existing in the open without fear. And in those moments she would wonder what it would be like to be free of the weight of secrecy. To introduce Adrian as her husband, to build a life where she didn't have to pretend. But the truth was she didn't know if that day would ever come. So she continued playing her role. She went to dinners, made small talk, filled her life with distractions. She let people believe she was unattached, untethered, free. Because revealing the truth wasn't an option. Not yet. Maybe not ever. It started with something small, something almost insignificant. A name spoken in passing, a lingering glance from someone who seemed to know more than they should. Olivia had spent years perfecting the art of hiding, weaving her secrets so tightly into the fabric of her life that she believed it was untouchable. But secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, always had a way of unraveling. The first sign came at a charity gala, an event she had attended countless times without incident. She was engaged in casual conversation with a group of colleagues when a man approached, his gaze sharp, assessing. He smiled politely, introduced himself as Daniel Pierce, an investigative journalist. There was nothing overtly alarming about him. His demeanor was calm, his words measured, but the way he looked at her sent a chill down her spine. "I believe we have a mutual acquaintance," he said smoothly. "Adrian Cole." Her blood ran cold. Years of practice kept her expression neutral, her smile perfectly in place. "I'm afraid I don't know who that is." Pierce didn't react immediately. He simply tilted his head, studying her as if she were a puzzle he was determined to solve. "That's interesting," he said. "Because I have reason to believe that you do." She wanted to turn and walk away, to put as much distance between herself and this conversation as possible. But she knew that running would only confirm his suspicions. Instead, she laughed lightly as if the very idea was ridiculous. "I think you have the wrong person." For a moment it seemed like he might let it go. But then he pulled something from his pocket, a photograph. He held it up just enough for her to see. It was her and Adrian, together. The image was slightly grainy, taken from a distance, but there was no mistaking the two figures in the frame. She recognized the moment instantly. It had been nearly a year ago, one of the rare nights when Adrian had been able to see her. They had met at a secluded cafe just outside the city, a place they thought was safe. Apparently they had been wrong. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but she forced herself to remain composed. "Where did you get that?" Pierce smiled, sensing her unease. "I have my sources." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Look, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm just looking for the truth. Adrian Cole is not who he pretends to be, and I think you know that." Olivia's heart clenched. She had always known Adrian was hiding something, but hearing it spoken aloud by a stranger made it feel all the more real. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, turning to leave. "I think you do," Pierce called after her. "And sooner or later, you're going to have to decide which side of his story you're on." She didn't stop. She couldn't. She moved through the crowd, ignoring the curious glances from people who had overheard fragments of the conversation. Her mind was racing. Had Adrian known someone was watching them? Had he suspected that their secret was on the verge of being exposed? And if Pierce had found this much, how much more did he know? By the time she reached her car, her hands were shaking. She fumbled for her phone, hesitating before dialing the only number that mattered. The call went straight to voicemail. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice barely steady. "Something's wrong. Call me." She ended the call, gripping the phone so tightly that her fingers ached. The life she had carefully built, the lie she had so meticulously upheld, it was all crumbling. And for the first time since this all began, she wasn't sure if she could stop it. Olivia sat in the dim glow of her apartment, the weight of the past few hours pressing down on her chest like a suffocating force. The photo. The journalist. The undeniable proof that someone had been watching them. The secret she had fought so hard to protect was beginning to slip through her fingers. She had always known that Adrian was hiding something. Even from the beginning, there had been an air of secrecy around him, a guardedness that no amount of love could break through. But she had never pushed. She had trusted him, convinced herself that whatever he was keeping from her, it was for a reason. Now for the first time she wasn't so sure. Her phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a blocked number. Her heart lurched. Without hesitation she answered. "Olivia." Adrian's voice was low, urgent. She closed her eyes, relief and frustration warring within her. "Where are you?" "Pause. Somewhere safe. You need to listen to me. Whatever you do, don't talk to that journalist again." She clenched her jaw. "He has a picture of us, Adrian. He knows." "I know," he said. "And it's not just him. There are others." Her breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Adrian exhaled, and she could hear the weariness in his voice. "It's time I told you the truth." She had waited years for those words, but now that they were here, she wasn't sure she was ready to hear them. "I never lied to you," he continued. "Not once. But I didn't tell you everything. And I need you to understand that it wasn't to hurt you, it was to protect you." She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "Protect me from what?" Adrian hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I wasn't always the man you know, Olivia. Before I met you, I was involved in things. Dangerous things." The room felt suddenly smaller, the air too thick. "What kind of things?" "Intelligence work. Government operations. Not the kind that make headlines, the kind that never exist on paper. I spent years infiltrating groups, dismantling threats before they could surface. And then, I got too close to something I shouldn't have." Her pulse pounded. "What did you do?" "I uncovered something I wasn't meant to see. Something that people were willing to kill for, His voice darkened. So I disappeared? The pieces of the puzzle, the secrecy, the sudden disappearances, the fear, were beginning to fall into place. The only way to keep you safe was to keep you separate from it, he said. If they knew about you, Olivia, they would use you to get to me. That's why we had to keep our marriage a secret. A cold shiver ran through her. Who are they? A silence stretched between them before he finally answered. A group that operates outside the law. People with power, with reach. The kind of people who don't leave loose ends. She pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to process the reality that was unfolding. So what now? Do they know about me? I don't think so, Adrian said. But Pierce, he's getting too close. If he starts digging in the wrong places, it won't just be him in danger. It'll be you too. Olivia swallowed the lump in her throat. This wasn't just about secrecy anymore. This was about survival. You need to stay away from him, Adrian continued. No matter what he tells you, no matter what he claims to know. If you let him pull you into this, it won't end well. A heavy silence filled the air. Do you regret it? She asked softly. Marrying me? His answer was immediate. Never. She closed her eyes, absorbing the weight of his words. She had spent years believing that love could exist in secrecy, that what they had was enough. But now, as she sat alone in the dark, she realized that loving him had made her a target. And no matter how much she wanted to deny it, their secret wouldn't stay hidden forever. It had been weeks since Olivia had last heard Adrian's voice. Weeks of unanswered calls, of restless nights staring at the ceiling, of paranoia creeping into every corner of her life. She had done as he asked, avoided Daniel Pierce, kept her head down, pretended everything was fine. But the silence was unbearable. She told herself she was prepared for this. That she had always known Adrian's life was built on shadows and disappearances. But this time felt different. This time she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. And then he returned. It happened on a night like any other, cold, quiet, lonely. Olivia had just come home from work, her coat damp from the rain, when she felt it. That strange, undeniable sense that she wasn't alone. She turned slowly, her heart pounding, and there he was. Adrian. He stood in the middle of her living room, drenched from the rain, his clothes dark and clinging to his frame. His face was shadowed, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, those familiar, piercing eyes, held something she couldn't quite name. Relief? Regret? For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, she found her voice. You broke in, she said, her tone a mix of anger and disbelief. He almost smiled. You still keep the spare key in the same place? She should have been furious. She should have demanded answers. But instead, she just stood there, staring at the man who had disappeared from her life without warning. Where have you been? She whispered. Adrian exhaled, running a hand through his wet hair. Hiding. From what? His jaw tightened. From the people who want me dead. A chill ran down her spine. Pierce? She asked. He's the least of our problems now. He took a step closer, but she didn't move. She didn't know if she wanted to run to him or push him away. I didn't have a choice, he said quietly. I had to disappear. If I had stayed, they would have found you. She swallowed hard. And now? Why are you here? Because it doesn't matter anymore, he said, his voice edged with something dark. They know about you, Olivia. Her breath caught. What? I tried to keep you out of this, Adrian continued. I did everything I could. But they found out. His eyes darkened. And they're coming. The room spun around her. She had spent years keeping their marriage a secret, believing that as long as she played her role, she was safe. But it had all been a lie. What do they want? She asked. Me, Adrian said. But if they can't get to me, they'll come for you instead. A heavy silence filled the space between them. Then what do we do? Olivia finally whispered. Adrian stepped closer, his fingers brushing against hers. We run? She looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. But there was none. He had made his choice. And now she had to make hers. Stay and risk everything. Or leave behind the life she had built to stand beside the man she loved. It wasn't a choice at all. Because no matter what secrets had been kept, no matter what dangers lay ahead, she had never stopped being his wife. And she wasn't about to lose him now. The night was eerily silent as Olivia and Adrian sat in the dimly lit motel room on the outskirts of the city. The weight of their decision pressed down on them, heavier than ever. There was no turning back now. Either they exposed the truth and took control of their fate, or they disappeared forever. Olivia had never felt more alive and more terrified at the same time. She had spent years living a lie, believing that secrecy was her only means of protection. But now she understood, truth was not just a weapon, it was her only chance at freedom. Adrian sat across from her, typing furiously on an encrypted laptop, his face illuminated by the glow of the screen. "The files are ready," he said, his voice steady but tense. "Everything I know, everything I've uncovered, it's all here. If anything happens to us, it gets sent to every major news outlet, every government official who isn't corrupt." Olivia nodded, her heart pounding. "And Daniel Pierce?" Adrian hesitated before answering. "He's our best shot at getting this out in a controlled way. He's been digging, and if we give him the full story, he won't stop until the truth is public." Olivia took a deep breath. The idea of trusting the same journalist who had nearly exposed their secret days ago felt ironic, but she knew Adrian was right. If they ran, they would spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. If they fought, there was at least a chance. A loud knock at the door made them both freeze. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. Adrian reached for the gun he had tucked beneath his jacket, his movements slow and deliberate. Another knock, this time softer. Then a voice. "It's Pierce. Open up." Olivia exhaled shakily as Adrian exchanged a glance with her before moving to open the door. Daniel Pierce stepped inside cautiously, his sharp eyes scanning the room before settling on Adrian. "I hope you know what you're doing," he muttered. "We don't have a choice," Adrian replied. Pierce nodded, then turned to Olivia. "And you? Are you ready for this?" She straightened her shoulders. More than ever. For the first time in a long time, she felt in control of her own fate. Pierce pulled out a recorder and set it on the table between them. "Then let's tell the world the truth." 2 weeks later, the world knew everything. Adrian's past. The corruption he had uncovered. The powerful figures who had tried to silence him. And Olivia, the woman who had kept his secret for so long, was no longer living in the shadows. The aftermath was chaos. The people who had been hunting them were now being hunted themselves, forced into the light by the evidence Adrian had leaked. Some were arrested. Others vanished before they could face justice. Adrian and Olivia were free. But freedom came at a cost. They had given up their old lives. Their home. Their sense of normalcy. But as they stood together in a quiet coastal town, far from the city where their story had begun, Olivia realized something. She no longer feared the truth. She turned to Adrian, watching as the ocean breeze ruffled his hair. "So," she said with a small smile, "what now?" Adrian glanced at her, then at the horizon. For the first time in years he looked at peace. "Now," he said, taking her hand in his, "we live,